Hi everyone, I'd just like to showcase my Gameboy Zero project, but instead of using a Raspberry Pi Zero, I've actually got a full-size Raspberry Pi 3B in there without making any modification to the Raspberry Pi B 3 itself. So I've seen other projects where they've actually gone and taken off the Ethernet and the USB ports, but I want to keep them in there. So I've managed to achieve this by hacking away at the case for quite a long time until they sort of fit in, albeit with a bit of overhang, but this doesn't bother me too much. From the outside I've got a normal DMG01 third-party shell, which cost me about £5, and then also some buttons off a SNES controller, which I ordered separately. The screen is the favourite one, which everyone seems to go for, which is the Blackview one, or the basically 320 by 240 pixel screen, which is 3.5 inches. So from the outside in, I've got the USB ports, all four of them apart from this one, which actually powers and is running the Arduino, which is running a mini keyboard, which lets me use these buttons. On the side here I've got screen controls, which helps me adjust brightness and contrast and saturation. The USB ports, which do work just fine. The Ethernet port I've not tested, but I thought it was kind of cool to leave it in there. It is quite big though. And then on the top I've got the full-size HDMI, an on-off switch right here next to the Raspberry Pi 3 power in, as well as the composite video out and headphone jack, and also another power socket here and another on-off switch here. So this one connects the battery up to the charge board, and this one connects the charge board up to the Raspberry Pi 3. So it's a bit weird to get your head around that, but it basically enables me to turn both of these switches off, and then I can just power the whole system from the wall without having the battery involved, or charge the battery separately without the system being on. And most recently I put a little charging indicator here, which is pretty cool. Excuse the dodgy glue work at the top there. Inside I've got an old phone battery from a Samsung S2, and it was like a double-sized battery that they did. Okay, so I've not yet made this so it can shut together with screws, so this is why I've got this black bit of Velcro around there. So I open this with the screen face down, then in here, if it hasn't all melted together, because it does get quite hot, I'm kind of doing this by feel rather than sight. So that's the two halves open. Okay, I don't think this is too messy compared to some of the builds I've seen. I've got the screen here, and this on top of the Raspberry Pi 3 is the screen driver board. Because I don't want to chop off these, the Raspberry Pi 3 has to sit perfectly against this backplate here. So it had to go in this way, it wasn't going to fit the other way around. It's a bit unfortunate because this kind of dangles free with just a piece of hot glue, and also it means there's not much cooling for the processor, which I've kind of jerry-rigged together like my own heatsink I've come up with. It does keep it a bit cooler, rather than not using heatsink and letting this plastic just touch the CPU all the time. From the screen driver I've got this, which goes to the three switches we saw for brightness, which came with the board. It was set up to be a reverse camera. And then working from the screen, that's composite video over to the Raspberry Pi. And then, as I said, one of the USB ports is inaccessible because that is wired on the data and power right over to this Arduino here, which is working as a keyboard, not a game controller, and then is hooked up to all the buttons here. So I run Berry Boot, so I can choose the OS I want to choose because it's just acting as a keyboard. Okay, so going from the Raspberry Pi, this distributes the power to the Arduino, and it gets its power from the charge board, which is actually on the back of the case, and I can see it here. So it's got a little LED in there when it tells me it's on or charging or is full, which is quite cool, being in the little clear case there. So that's hidden up here. And then this is the power switch from the battery, which then goes over to the charge board, and then the charge board power comes down and over to the Raspberry Pi with this little cable here, which I've undone, this JT connector. This is just a small amplifier down here, which is powered off the charge board. And then I've got this small bit of circuitry in here, which is the battery monitor, and that comes off this cable here after the switch from the battery, so I can read the battery levels without the system even being on. So from the amplifier, that powers this 1/2 watt 8 ohm speaker, which can be interrupted by this switch here, which turns it off and on, which is pretty useful. And then finally, I've just got a small switch over here, which runs over to a pair of GPIO pin and ground, which is for safe shutdown. Okay, so that's the internals. Let's close this back up and power it on. Come on. Yes. Okay, I've got 2 power switches here, so I'll connect the battery, which is already set to the on position here, and then I'll connect the charge board up to the Raspberry Pi, which then gives me a small LED here. It actually shines through at a cool place, which is where the plastic's quite thin. And then you can see, there we go, that's the Arduino, which also shines through the plastic, which I think's a pretty cool look, especially at night. And then here, I've got Berry Boot, so I've got a backup of my image, in case I mess it up. And then I've also got some other OSs I was going to give a try. So I've got everything on the GBZ theme, which is really good, and I haven't managed to scrape all of the screens just yet. I've got the volume on. Also, what's pretty cool is I managed to configure the hotkeys so that my select hotkey can control the volume. And then you can also obviously play around with loads of other RetroArch configuration here, like save states and stuff. I was kind of worried that using a keyboard emulator was going to make things quite slow, but it's really fast and really responsive. You can even speed stuff up. Yeah, because I haven't got the L and R buttons, I've told this to use the X and Y buttons instead, which means I have to do this kind of weird claw action. I was going to install shoulder buttons, but it was getting kind of crowded inside of the case. I thought if I really wanted to play a game that used them, then I'd use an external controller with the many USBs I've got. Okay, and that's my build.